Imagine two men standing at the edge of a decision. The first man is furious. His hands are shaking. His voice is rising. He's been wronged, humiliated, pushed past his limit, and he wants everyone in the room to know it. He's unpredictable, volatile. You can read every emotion moving across his face like weather across a sky. The second man is calm, perfectly unnervingly calm. He's been wronged just as badly, maybe worse, but you'd never know it. His face is still. His voice is measured. His eyes are watching. Now, which man is more dangerous? Most people say the first one, the angry one, the one they can see. They're wrong. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that the most powerful human being is not one who destroys his enemies, it's one who has the power to destroy them and chooses not to. That distinction seems small. It isn't. It might be the most significant gap in all of human psychology, because here's the thing most of us never stop to consider. Self-control isn't just a virtue. It isn't just discipline or willpower or the ability to skip dessert. Self-control at its deepest level is a form of power so profound that it has toppled empires, shaped religions, and made certain individuals virtually untouchable in ways that weapons never could. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. The same quality we praise in saints and philosophers, we should be terrified of in the wrong hands. Let's start with something neuroscience has shown us. When you feel a strong emotion, anger, fear, desire, your brain doesn't process it cleanly. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, fires first. It reacts before your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning part of your brain, even knows what's happening. This is why people say things they regret, why they punch walls, why they cry in public when they swore they wouldn't. Emotional reactions are fast, automatic, and evolutionarily ancient. The prefrontal cortex is slower, more deliberate. It's the part that whispers, wait, think, consider the consequences. Most of us live somewhere in the tension between those two systems. We feel the pull of the amygdala, and sometimes, not always, we listen to the prefrontal cortex before we act. But what about someone whose prefrontal cortex wins every single time? What does that person look like? On the surface, they look admirable, composed, trustworthy even. Someone you'd want in a crisis. Someone you'd want leading you. But there's a shadow side to that coin that we almost never talk about. Think about the most powerful leaders in human history, not the loudest ones. The ones who actually accumulated and held power for decades. Caesar, Augustus, Napoleon in his prime, Abraham Lincoln, who taught himself to project stillness even as his interior world was consumed by grief and pressure. Sun Tzu wrote an entire philosophy of war built not around aggression, but around patience, concealment, and emotional control. The supreme art of war, he said, is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That isn't a passive idea. That's terrifying. Because if you never have to fight, if you can win before the battle starts, you become nearly impossible to stop. Here's a thought experiment. Two chess players sit down across from each other. The first player shows excitement when they get a good position, frustration when they blunder, relief when they survive a threat. The second player shows nothing. Their face is glass. Every emotion locked somewhere you can't see. Which player would you rather face? The second player isn't just harder to read. They're harder to manipulate, harder to bait, harder to destabilize. Every psychological lever you might pull, provocation, pressure, uncertainty, slides off them like water off stone. This is what psychologists call emotional regulation. And in moderate, healthy doses, it's one of the most studied predictors of life success. People who can regulate their emotions make better decisions under stress. They maintain better relationships. They perform better in high-stakes environments. But the research also shows something darker. A small subset of people who score extremely high on emotional regulation also score high on something else: the willingness to use other people's emotions against them. There's a concept in psychology called the dark triad. 3 personality traits that, when combined, produce people who are extraordinarily capable of harm while appearing perfectly reasonable on the surface. Those traits are narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Now, psychopathy gets a lot of attention in crime documentaries and thriller films, and it conjures images of violence. But the research on high-functioning psychopathy tells a more nuanced and in some ways more disturbing story. High-functioning psychopaths, and here we're talking about a studied psychological profile, not a villain from a movie, often show abnormally low stress responses. Where most people's cortisol spikes in a confrontation, where most people's heart rate climbs before a difficult conversation, in some individuals, it barely moves. They don't experience social situations the way you do. The emotional charge that makes lying feel uncomfortable, that makes conflict feel dangerous, that makes cruelty feel wrong. For them, it's muted. This means they can do things the rest of us can't, not because they're stronger, because a particular kind of internal alarm simply doesn't go off. And here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. Studies looking at professional environments, not prisons, not crime statistics, but boardrooms and executive suites, have found that psychopathic traits appear at higher rates among CEOs than in the general population. The same traits that protect someone from panic during a hostile takeover or a company crisis: coldness, charm without genuine emotional investment, the ability to make hard cuts without being paralyzed by guilt. Those traits also make someone capable of causing catastrophic harm without a flicker of remorse. We keep building systems that select for this. But let's slow down, because this isn't just about clinical psychology. This is about something more universal, something you may have felt yourself. There's a version of self-control that is genuinely noble. Stoic philosophers called it apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but freedom from emotional disturbance. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote in his private journals about the daily practice of controlling his reactions, not suppressing emotions, but observing them, understanding them, refusing to let them make decisions on his behalf. And there's a version of self-control that is a mask. The difference is intent. The Stoic practices restraint so that he can act wisely, treat others justly, and live in accordance with his values even when everything around him is chaos. The mask wearer practices restraint so that no one can see what's coming. But here's the philosophical crisis at the center of this. How do you tell them apart? From the outside, they look identical. Both are calm, both are measured, both appear trustworthy. The inner architecture is completely different. The external presentation is the same. This isn't an abstract problem. It's something you encounter in real life, in relationships, in leadership, in politics. People who present emotional control as virtue, and we extend enormous trust to them because of it. All that same control is being deployed as a weapon. Let's push this even further. Some of the most effective manipulation in human interaction works not through brute force, but through the strategic withholding of reaction. When someone expects you to be angry and you are not, you have disoriented them. When someone expects to provoke you and cannot, they have lost their leverage. When you can sit across from someone in a negotiation, or a conflict, or even an intimate relationship, and reveal nothing of your internal state, you have assumed a position of enormous power. This is why silence is sometimes the most powerful response. This is why the person who never seems rattled makes everyone else feel slightly less certain of themselves. There's a term for this dynamic in influence and persuasion research: strategic emotional asymmetry. One person in an interaction is emotionally legible, the other isn't. The legible person is vulnerable in ways they often don't even realize. They're broadcasting their priorities, their fears, their pressure points. The illegible person receives all of that information and reveals nothing in return. Information in human interaction is leverage, and emotional transparency is information. Now here's where we have to sit with something genuinely difficult, because this cuts in multiple directions at once. If emotional control is dangerous in the wrong hands, then what? Should we distrust calmness? Should we be suspicious of people who don't react? That path leads to absurdity. We'd penalize composure. We'd reward volatility. And there's a deeper problem. The pursuit of self-mastery is woven into nearly every philosophical, spiritual, and psychological tradition that has ever tried to describe what a good human life looks like. Buddhism teaches the cessation of craving and reactivity. Stoicism teaches mastery over the passions. Islam has the concept of nafs, the self, and the spiritual struggle to discipline it. The Bhagavad Gita tells Arjuna to act without attachment to outcomes. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most evidence-based psychological interventions we have, teaches you to interrupt automatic emotional reactions and choose deliberate responses. Every tradition that has thought carefully about human flourishing has arrived at some version of the same answer: learn to govern yourself. So the quality we're describing as dangerous is also the quality described as wisdom. How is that possible? Maybe the answer lives in something that's harder to see than behavior. Maybe it lives in what the control is for. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to found logotherapy, wrote that the last human freedom, the one that could never be taken away, was the freedom to choose one's response to any given situation. Even in conditions of total external control, even in a concentration camp, a human being retained the interior freedom to decide what their suffering meant, to decide how to carry themselves, to decide who they would be. That's one of the most profound uses of self-control ever described. Now contrast it with something else. A person who exercises exactly the same interior discipline, the same separation between stimulus and response, but whose purpose is accumulation, control over others, the maintenance of an image, the execution of a plan that others are permitted to see. The mechanism is identical. The soul of it is not. And maybe that's the real insight here. Not that self-control is dangerous, but that it multiplies whatever is already present. In a person of genuine integrity, it produces wisdom, reliability, grace under pressure. In a person whose core motivations are self-serving and indifferent to others, it produces something that functions like a weapon with the safety on. Everything held in, everything aimed. The ancient Romans had a saying, quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who watches the watchman? Who guards the guards? We might ask it differently. Who governs the governor? If a person has achieved mastery over every external reaction, over every visible emotion, then what internal check remains? What stops them? Their values, if they have them, their conscience, if it speaks, the relationships they've built, if those matter to them. But if none of those things apply, then nothing does. And that person, that perfectly controlled, perfectly composed, perfectly unreadable person, moves through the world without friction, without resistance, without the social and emotional breaks that slow the rest of us down. They can be exactly who they choose to be, in any room, with any person, for any purpose. So we return to the two men at the beginning. The angry one you can manage. You can see him coming. You can negotiate with his emotion. You can appeal to it, redirect it, wait for it to exhaust itself. Anger is temporary. It burns through fuel. It shows its hand. The composed one gives you nothing to work with. And here's the final question, the one I want to leave you with, because I don't think there's a clean answer, and I'm not sure there should be. You've spent your life learning in one way or another to control yourself, to be better, more patient, less reactive, to think before you speak, to feel without being ruled by what you feel. All of that effort, all of that discipline, all of that quiet interior work that no one ever sees. What is it for? Because the capacity is neutral, the mastery is neutral, it's a vessel, and whatever lives at the center of you, your deepest values, your actual intentions, the thing you're moving toward when no one is watching, that's what fills it. The most dangerous person in the world isn't the one who controls others. It isn't the one with the loudest voice or the sharpest weapon. It's the one who has mastered themselves completely in service of something that has no room for you. But the most extraordinary person in the world, same person, different answer to the question at the center. So here's what I want you to sit with tonight, not as a thought experiment, as a real question about your own life. You are, right now, becoming better at governing yourself, more disciplined, more deliberate, more capable of choosing your response instead of simply having one. What are you building all of that for? And are you sure?